Everybody wants to talk about Epstein and the Epstein files and famous violators, but nobody wants to check themselves. Nobody wants to call their friends out. Nobody wants to think about the ways that we are all implicated in making life and making sexual interactions less safe. It's Accountability August, so it's time that we have a very hard and perhaps thorough and emotional conversation about this. Before we start, I just want to say, much love to you. Like, it's a hard time and it takes a lot of vulnerability to reflect on your own behaviors and thoughts and to try to have a serious conversation. And it's a heavy atmosphere and social media is very toxic and oftentimes makes us feel very unsafe. I hope that what I talk about today is not going to contribute negatively to that. I just want you all to know, I love you, not in a parasocial way, so to speak, but in a human to human, we're all human, none of us above anybody way, because I feel like that's the only way that we can really get at some of the fault lines in this conversation. Regardless, we're going to be having conversations about assault and rape culture, especially. And we need to do so, as I said, with a lens of where am I implicated? What am I doing that contributes to the problem? I'm somebody who has, to be frank with you, been violated in the past. I've been one of those many Gen Z/Zillennial kids that got kind of groomed online in chat rooms. It was a situation where somebody, I think pretty obviously when I look back on it, but not at the time, was pretending to be a girl / their sister and would hang out in this chat room that was online and flirt with me as the sister. And it was, oh, she likes you. And then it was an inappropriate sexual conversation started happening. Oh, I have a girlfriend, that type of shit. And I laugh because there is a lot of humor that I find in it. I also could have been a lot worse. But frankly, when I look back, it was a wound. It was a wound, It was a difficult thing to go through. And I didn't ever feel like I had the space to talk about something like that. Because where exactly are you going to find that space? Maybe, you talk about it in therapy, but it's one thing to talk about private things that have happened to you in therapy. It's another thing to process that through therapy or through a therapeutic process and try to think about how it colors how you see the world. And I think, being very honest with you, throughout my life, I've had these experiences where I felt like I've been around, either in person or online, people that were inappropriately sexual, but I looked up to them and thought they were really cool. And so that inappropriate horniness and inappropriate sexualness made things very difficult in a way that couldn't really be named, because it was you don't want to call people out because then you look like a prude. You don't want to act like you're infringing on people's sex positivity. You don't know if it's just me or if it's something reflecting how people are treating other people. But I do think that even as I do genuinely think the discourse has gotten better when it comes to talking about assault or talking about, different sexual violations over the past few years, there's a lot of ways in which it's stagnated or gotten worse. I'm getting a phone call. The reason I really wanted to have this conversation is that multiple people that have reached out to me in some way or spoken to me in some way about the need for a conversation like this. In particular, I have a patron who I will keep anonymous for obvious reasons, who had some really clarifying and important things to say about the way rape and sexual assault are being discussed right now. First and foremost, even just the ability to talk about these subjects on YouTube is being censored. And I think a lot of people are getting very mad at YouTubers for censoring the word rape and putting it as grape, or censoring, the word sex. But I literally had to change my thumbnail in order to go live because my broadcasting software would not allow me to use a thumbnail that had the word sex on it. And so as much as, we can kind of check creators for being cynical in their intentions and talking about sensitive topics in ways that they can profit from, and as much as we can try to really make sure that these conversations are being had with seriousness, I do want to remind you all that the reason people are doing this is because they have jobs and they want to talk about these serious things and they have to circumvent these censors. It's not trivializing necessarily to add censors in order to talk about something that needs to be talked about. We are trying to get past censorship. And sometimes we can take out our frustration with the way that this political economy works, the way that online content creation works, we can take it out on creators who are just trying to figure out how to do their job the best way. And yeah, look for a compensation because this is how they make a living. This is how they pay the bills, especially in a time where it's increasingly hard to pay the bills. That being said, things like that, or things like, conversations about famous abusers like Epstein, like Diddy, Kanye, the whole Drake versus Kendrick beef centering on Drake's weird behavior with young women, perhaps underage women, I think really platformed larger discussions about like, hey, these men are creepy, call out creepy behavior in men. But this patron had this really important thing to say as somebody who was speaking from the perspective of learning a lot about sex work, like having done sex work, like having been victimized in the past. They told me when a story like the whole Epstein case hits the media, it has the impact of further burying attention towards the far more common forms of harm that could be occurring to your neighbor, best friend, or even a family member. Yes, I see. But yes, this is why I say, everybody wants to call out Epstein. Nobody wants to call out their friends. Nobody wants to call out their bros. And nobody wants to check themselves. Because, if you are under the impression that the Epstein case is like the square example of where even trafficking, but sexual abuse in general occurs, you're misled, you're misguided, you're misinformed. Moreover, I think it can be a performative thing, frankly. I don't like to talk about people being performative, but I do think a lot of people are performative in that they use these famous examples to perform this image of like, I hate these violations. I'm so pro-consent. I hate creeps. I hate pedophiles. I hate abusers. But being like, I hate abusers is not the same as keeping abused victims safe. Declaring your hate for men who abuse, and in fact sometimes tripping into power fantasies about like what I would do if I caught somebody who was trying to violate da 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 da, like that's overcompensating, and it doesn't really actually help the people who need it. And so we're going to have a bit of a wide-ranging conversation about how we talk about sex very poorly. I wanted to give a special shout out to, for instance, a video like this by Zena Weena. I really like her content. I hate the word crack, which is essentially talking about one of the more fashionable terms right now online for having sex with somebody, which is cracking. I'll just play a minute of it.
So I absolutely hate the word crack, and probably for reasons that are more woke than not. But something about this term, especially in the way that it's used, let me crack. Allow me to crack you. It's something about like this idea of like being destroyed that I feel like is an implicit with this like concoction of words put together in a sentence. Like, you want to crack me. You want to crack me like an egg. And I'm no longer, as if I'm something to be used. I feel like in all these words that we use when we talk about sexual intercourse and relations between people, there's always some concept of defiling. And this defiling always happens to the woman. And it always feels it feels like when someone says they want to crack you, it feels like
I'll pause it there. I think this is something I've noticed as well. I've noticed other people sharing that opinion as well. And what's interesting is that it's far from the first time. This is the latest in a long line of terms that we have normalized about having sex, that normalize the idea of a type of violence and a type of like domination, usually over a feminine coded person, over a woman in a sexual relation, whether it's, I'll beat that shit up or da 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 da. Crack is just this new version of it. And I guess we're at this point now where, since this conversation has progressed, we can call these things out as they're happening now, but we're still catching up to how much it's happened in the past. Does that make sense? Dalen, I'll get to it. So I wrote, we are sensationalizing rape. We're not addressing it. Social media political discussion memifies and commoditizes anti-capitalist and decolonial ideas. Just how all media you dislike is spiritually Israeli, and every man you dislike is pedo-coded. I've seen like memes about this as well, where people are like, or somebody had this rant recently, I don't know who, streaming, where it's like, oh, everybody's a pedophile. Like, it's just apparently this thing that people are doing now where they'll be like, oh, you're a pedophile if they don't like what you said. I've gotten it to some degree. Like, God knows how many times I've pulled up with a mustache on this stream and somebody has the brilliant idea to be like, you're giving pedophile, you have a pedo stash, this guy definitely is an abuser, da 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 da. And it's like, It's literally just the way that I look on a certain day, the way that I chose to present myself, nothing to do with the content that I said in the video. But oftentimes, because of how charged these things are, whether it's that we're talking about like, yeah, spiritually Israeli, or whether it is we're talking about Epstein, right? Since they're so heavily charged, anybody who wields these words ends up getting a type of clout. Anybody who wields these words against somebody gets this kind of benefit of the upvote, so to speak, where you don't really have to substantiate it so much. If somebody comes into my comment section on a video that could be about like which type of chicken fingers are the best, and if that video has enough people who dislike it, a comment saying this is Epstein coded will get upvotes. Why am I getting another call, bro? Okay, before this stream was rudely interrupted, a lot of you were pointing out too how the word smash is a perfect example of this that predates crack. It's almost as if cracking got worse. But, you know, smash or pass, right? Like these are terms that we're so used to using. But this is not just the case in terms of terms we use to describe sex. It's not even the case in terms of understanding that like most people who are violated by somebody that they know and trust, right? It's very, very common for the person to have sexually assaulted you, to have been your friend, to have been your partner, to have been a family member, etc. So again, this idea of, you know, the shadowy figure leaping from the bush and kidnapping the child from the street and then shipping her off. It's not that that doesn't exist, but it's actually oftentimes used as this prevailing example, distracting us from what is happening right in front of our eyes, what we refuse to see. RIP. Jeez, I never heard of RIP. The patron also accounted for how this applies to sex trafficking. This is a lengthy paragraph, but I'll read it for you. A lot of you probably know about this case. So they named the Twitch streamer Amaranth and how she was being abused and trafficked by her partner. The specific event did happen years ago. I was on Twitter myself at the time, and if I recall correctly, during a stream, her partner called her and started verbally abusing and berating her. It appears she's had a few more situations occur since then that may or may not be related. It appeared he was pressuring her into the OnlyFans work she was doing, which, if true, is absolutely sex trafficking. I was at the time actively working on Twitter as a sex worker myself and an active member of the more activist side of sex work Twitter, where many were highlighting her story as the way modern trafficking is often done, some citing their own experiences. The amount of people denying that this was trafficking because of the stereotype of women and girls being kidnapped and violently abused is so dominant in the way society discusses the topic that the idea someone can be forced into a compromising situation by someone close to them and who they love just wasn't acceptable. Yet if we look at research done by academic institutions and government agencies, I avoid many activist organizations due to bad experiences with narrative twisting, though they're not all universally bad. It's repeatedly shown that many people, regardless of age or gender, are forced and coerced into the sex industry by people they know and trust. The stereotype of cross borders and global human trafficking, while it is something that happens, is the minority. I really appreciate everybody who's sharing so honestly in the chat. Like Snow's Leaves, I convinced myself for over a year that it wasn't coercion because I was initially the one who pursued him for a relationship despite me being 14 and him being 18. And shout out to Chinyere, thank you for the super chat. That's why people are so defensive about sexual assault, because people assume it's strangers. I totally understand that. I mean, I don't understand in terms of me having been through that, but I understand why you would feel that way. It's a really, really heavy situation. Hopefully somehow this conversation can bring you comfort, and this space can bring you some type of comfort, and maybe help. Also, we can think of some ways that we can provide ideas, resources, etc. So yeah, Amaranth's case, for those of you who were listening about that and who aren't aware of this was from 4 years ago. There was an article that was published about it on Yahoo. Yeah, it gets really, really heavy here, so I won't get too much into details, but I do suggest that people look into it as an example of like how sex trafficking often looks. But it's exactly true that like 66% of trafficking victims are trafficked by someone they know and trust. This is from the co-founder of Safe House Project.
The traffickers. I think that's also one of the most interesting things because, you know, all of us were raised with the idea of stranger danger, right? Watch out for the creepy man in the white van down the street. But I think people miss the fact that 66% of trafficking victims are trafficked by somebody that they know and trust.
So another thing is I'll recommend this video from this channel, Seizure Girl, who shared some really important anecdotes and analyses from their own experience about how sex trafficking really occurs.
Seizure Girl, and I am here as a survivor of trafficking to let everybody know what is trafficking? What are the legal definitions? What goes into it? What are some red flags you could look out for? And also, what are one or two of the legal definitions that are mostly used in trafficking? And also like an explanation of kind of what a trafficking situation would look like that most people don't assume according to movies. So when you think of trafficking, what comes to mind? For me, what comes to mind before everything was you're kidnapped, you're put in a van, and then you're put in a really bad situation and you're shackled up. But it's actually really different from that.
I also want to just take the second to look at that example that Seizure Girl gives here of how it can actually look.
So let's take a woman, a young girl, for instance. She grew up in a really bad household. Her parents are not kind to her. There's a lot of maybe abuse, and she doesn't know what to do. She's been abused her whole life, and she's trying to get out. She meets a boy. This boy she ends up like falling for in a really deep way. And unfortunately, the boy uses what we know as, what's this going to be called? Lover boy method. Now, through this method, he's going to basically manipulate her and manipulate the situation to try to get her to come and be with him. He could say, I love you. I want to help you. I know some way that you can make money. You can just go on dinner dates with guys. It's super easy and I will be there for you. The girl sees a way out through the boy. She trusts him. She's naive. Unfortunately, it's not all that it seems. So in order to get out and escape from the situation that she is in of serious abuse and trauma of growing up with an abusive parent and staying with one, she then leans on this boy to try to help her and to try to go into something. First of all, he's lying. He already knows that when she gets on a Greyhound bus and goes 2 states away to go and meet with him, that there is no dinner dates. It's not getting paid for dinner dates. No, it's getting paid for what? Sexual acts.
So yeah, I'll pause there, but I do recommend that people check out the video and like check out this person's channel because they offer really important resources to understand how trafficking really works. Epstein sensationalism, as well as movements about celebrities like Drake, Diddy, and others, represented massive changes in the mainstreaming of discourse about consent. Younger generations are more cognizant of discourses about age gaps and predation than ever before. And yet older generations, even the left-leaning ones that wanted this change, now act almost as if they regret it, lamenting young people's puritanism. We're going to talk about 2 examples of that from the past month, basically from July, in which people were positioned now in this cultural context as having been puritanical, as having been overly conservative or overly judgmental, dogmatic, aggressive, in having essentially a critique of something that they see as rape culture, whether it be how it appeared in fiction, like criticizing a character in a fictional work, or a TikTok discourse. Either way, people who are often presenting themselves or consider themselves progressive, who consider themselves very passionate about like justice or equality, are often on the other end of these conversations, feeling like they're almost trying to rein people in from going too far. And I think that there's something that's really important to be analyzed there, because what's really going too far? And why do people often feel like somebody's going too far, even about the things that they're supposedly also agreeing in? Sometimes it can be a case where it reveals things about ourselves that we now feel a bit endangered in terms of being revealed to other people. But sometimes it has nothing to do with the personal, or very little to do with the personal, and a lot more to do with things that we haven't unpacked, that we think are normal, that we think are okay, but really aren't. That's fucking rough, Ohala. In my case, it was a settler woman who trafficked me to settler men. As a part of missing and murdered indigenous people in the Americas, especially Black and brown natives. They also gave me COVID. Yeah, that's another aspect of, trafficking that's really important to highlight. Again, not just the groups that it can often happen to and the settler dynamic, but also the ways in which, people are endangered, not just by like physical acts of violence, but by lack of health safety. I'll continue with some of the notes that I wrote about. We are being called to create a new sex positivity movement right now. One that's not a one-dimensional celebration of a particular approach to sex positivity, like one that's like be sexually active a certain way, dress a certain way, talk a certain way, use certain cool popular terms for sex, or even just like ideas of like, yeah, promiscuity, yeah, hedonism, right? We don't want to just platform a one-dimensional approach to sex positivity anymore. We need to make space for sex positivity that may appear more prudish, so to speak, and focuses on different ways people can express sex positivity or different ways in which people can set their boundaries to keep us safer from sexual harassment and assault. But it requires that we call ourselves and our friends out, and we don't like to do that. We would rather talk about Epstein. I have a quote from Amiya Srinivasan, the writer of The Right to Sex, which is a really good book that I think a lot of folks should check. I have a couple quotes from her. One is, sex, which we think of as the most private of acts, is in reality a public thing. The roles we play, the emotions we feel, who gives, who takes, who demands, who serves, who wants, who is wanted, who benefits, who suffers. The rules for all this were set long before we entered the world. I think this is really important because even in a conversation, like apparently there's a discourse about bi men on TikTok, you know, I don't know, man. TikTok discourses, right? But a discourse about like straight women basically being like, I have a right to deny bi men from dating me. I have a right to not want to date bi men. And what if I think it's gross? So what? So what if I'm biphobic, right? It's kind of reactionary tendency among people who might consider themselves progressive in different lanes. But again, like seeing their own internalized bigotry or seeing their own internalized discomfort can be really earth-shattering, and it can be something from which you react instead by being really defensive and really nasty. But moreover, right, it's really hard because we think of this type of stuff as so private and so personal, and it is in a lot of ways, but it's also very political. Everything from your dating preferences. I had a video years ago, dating preferences, the idea, I just prefer to date white women. What's the deal, right? Or these ideas of, yeah, like what we like in bed, what people don't like in bed, how many people somebody sleeps with, etc. These are not ideas that can be separated from like social ideas. These are things that we are taught. These are things we are programmed to like in a lot of ways. And true freedom starts with recognizing that and saying, okay, well, maybe my upbringing might be holding me back in certain ways. Maybe I might be causing harm in certain ways because I was taught that this was normal and I don't want to let that go. To Hermie Torres's point, does everyone hate Epstein? Has there been motion around getting those involved to receive rightful punishments and ostracization from society, or has it mostly been conspiracy narratives? I think a lot of people are just delving into conspiracy. A lot of people are just delving into throwing terms around. Epstein this and Epstein that. Because it's a very high currency right now, especially online, to just tag something as Epstein coded and then you win the argument. And then the other person that you're arguing against is no longer just a person you disagree with, or the media that you're calling Epstein coded is no longer something you disagree with, but is a matter of fact ontologically evil. And it's really, really useful for people that something is so emotionally compelling and so emotionally like unsettling that we see it as ontologically evil, because then they know that they can just manipulate it against us over and over again and get us to believe and support all types of things that we shouldn't, or give themselves street cred, give themselves clout. And we have to see past that tendency. I also see that a lot of people, classically will fashion themselves as wanting justice, as wanting to fight the pedophiles, so to speak, in politics. But once those pedophiles are very obviously revealed to them, and it's not this like fancy, fantastical story about people holding rituals with cauldrons, or it implicates people that they supported or people that they rely on, then it's complicated, or then it's something we just pretend isn't there, because what they're really after is just winning a specific argument, making a specific lane for themselves. But of course, lastly, nobody should be under the impression that any justice system around the world is really going after predators, is really trying to get justice for victims of abuse, really trying to get justice for women, especially marginalized women, poor women. Some people can debate about certain states being better than others with their justice system, and I think that there can be merit to that. But the reality is the cops are not here to protect us. The legal system is not here to protect us. It's here to protect the rich. And somebody like Epstein or somebody like all of his cohorts, they were never really going to be taken to justice by a system that literally is run by them. Yeah, I feel you with that, Nova. So our ability to interrogate our own desires is crucial in understanding and changing the world. Many of us only seem willing to interrogate the desires of others who we deem as backwards, and not our own. We seem unwilling to believe we can fail to keep ourselves and each other safe when it comes to sex. It's always the outside, devilish actor to watch for, making themselves a predator or making themselves a victim, each out of a sense to manipulate us. We have these conversations fully externally and not internally. We have these conversations fully in the realms that are comfortable for us, that make us feel like we're the good guys. And that will always limit you. If you have to be the good guy in order for something to be true, you're not really going to get at the truth, are you? So let's move on now to a conversation about obsession. Some of you called this out earlier. The conversation about the movie Obsession, which came out a couple months ago, was, I think, a really solid litmus test. A lot of people use that term. A lot of people use the term litmus test. Like, the way that you're reacting to what this movie is saying will reveal a lot about how you actually think about women, how you actually think about sex and rape culture, and how seriously you're willing to take on those conversations. Just as one example of numerous videos, I'm going to just shout out this channel, Boss Girlified, and their video, Pay Attention to What He Thinks About Obsession. Let me actually preamble this a little bit before I play it. I don't know if you guys heard about the Alex Myers situation. This is another YouTuber who has made movie reviews for some time and whose review of Obsession was an utter disaster. So that's the context for this.
This whole Alex Myers situation with his Obsession review is so ironic because I knew this day was gonna come.
If you ever have doubts about your favorite creator, just ask them what they think about the movie Obsession.
You know, to Bear's credit, he's not immediately jumping at the chance to take advantage of her or whatever. Like, he gives her privacy and space. He doesn't want to make it weird. He turns around when she takes her shirt off. And, like, based on what people were saying about this movie online, I expected Bear to be this, like, horribly angry, misogynistic incel dude, right? But, like, up until this point, he's just some super socially awkward loser who has a crush on a girl.
So there are many clips from the Alex Myers video that were wild. I also recommend Amanda Todd Hunter's video on the situation. But essentially, whether it be his animation style and choosing to depict the women characters in the movie as particularly sexualized, despite what the plot reveals about, you know, what's going on with them, particularly in the case of Nikki. The ways that he's just like kind of callously, yes, but the ways that he's just kind of like lightheartedly talking about this Bear character and his attraction for Nikki, about her being like a hot Latina who's into crystals, and also just continuously going back to this idea like, whoa, everybody thinks that this guy is such a predator, and so saying this on Twitter, but I don't know, up to this point, he's just a guy who's just like into a girl a lot and awkward and doesn't really know what to do. So I won't give too many spoilers away about the movie, but I'm going to say this: if you watch that movie and you don't think that Bear is the villain, you are probably missing some really important things. I'm not going to just sweepingly call people, for instance, like unsafe or reactionary because of their opinion on a piece of media, but let's just say that like a lot of them are. And it's not a case of you maybe misinterpreting something or missing something or not having seen something. Then you've got to really explain yourself as to why you would think that that's not the case. Yeah, he kept mentioning the Latina thing, Chinyere. Again, there's also just been this way in which, for instance, like Latinas have been talked about this year, over the past couple years, over history, of course, but like it's been very notable, for instance, in like supposedly progressive spaces, progressive men making jokes about like ICE and like how we have to fight ICE because what about the big booty Latinas that we're going to lose? Like, absolutely disgusting, you know? And this kind of thing being used as a lens to talk about a movie in which a woman is literally being forced against her will to enter a relationship with someone and who has come apart, right? Thus clearly has a conversation about consent and about dating problems, let's say, in 2026, for that to be treated with the seriousness of like, almost like you're joking about porn categories. It just boggles the mind, you know? It boggles the mind. And it's gross, and y'all are gross. It's not a complicated movie in terms of who is the villain. It just hits close to home. That was the sort of theme that it felt like Alex Myers' review of that movie was struggling with or tapping into. He felt like clearly with some of the jokes that he was making that this Bear character reminded him of him. He was making all of these leaps and bounds to just try to talk about all the behaviors that Bear was doing that weren't evil, that weren't abusive or predatory, up until the point at the end where it's very clear that he's being abusive and predatory, and that's the point in the movie where he goes wrong. But Alex Myers' desire to sort of separate those behaviors from the ending behavior are really bizarre. Not something that you would usually do if you're trying to get context on somebody who's evil. You wouldn't just be like, well, he wasn't that bad until he started doing this. This is another point Amanda Todd Hunter makes quite well in her video. But because a lot of you relate to Bear, or a lot of you know a guy who's like Bear, there is this discomfort that you're not dealing with. That perhaps some of the ways you view women, even if hopefully, it's never resulted in anybody getting outwardly hurt, but a lot of the ways you view dating in women might be steeped in rape culture. Lily Starlight is telling how many men also say Bear is dumb for not seeing that Sarah liked him and it's a waste because she's hot. Like, damn, these people are missing the point. I think it's very clear that a lot of people will miss the point, and they have these spaces that reinforce that behavior because everything's a laugh, everything's, a joke, everything is a sensational thing. And as long as you are not saying, I love Jeffrey Epstein, then you can basically just like use whatever rhetoric you want. You can basically affiliate with whatever dude you want. You can relate with any dude that you want. Nobody's asking you to be like on a soapbox each and every day talking about how evil all these different men are for all these little reasons. Nobody's asking you to even get involved in like sexual abuse victim support organizing, which would be a great thing for you to do. But like just the mere asking of a person to like, hey, like progress, hey, like open your mind, like, hey, like reflect, is too painful, right? It's too painful. One of the main things that I think I take away from Bear's character is that men are socialized towards infatuation, possession, and thus dehumanization as romance. And to talk about that, I should talk a little bit about my own experience. I've had periods of time in my life where I might as well have been in psychosis, frankly, because of how much I was like maladaptive daydreaming about some girl. And it really wasn't about the girl. It was about what I was trying to escape from. It was about what I was trying to embody, what kind of cool person I really wanted to be. But regardless, I had been taught to basically by media, by like social norms and, whatever else. I had been basically allowed or encouraged to be like, yeah, just put everything into this. Just put everything into like, girl craziness, so to speak. And I am one of many people who probably grew up with that feeling that seems characteristic of Bear's character. That feeling of, oh, I'm the loser. Oh, I'm the guy who can't get the girl. Oh, I'm the nice guy. If only she would see me the way I see her, etc. Which just puts you in a position of like, for one, dehumanizing the target of your affection in order to continue to hold on to a fantasy in which the world can kind of treat you with some sort of power, that you can be assigned a type of power. And ultimately leading you to behave in these ways that are really not considerate. And I've had to reevaluate a lot of the things that I did, like really even before the age of 20, a couple of times throughout my life where, I didn't treat a person very well, or like maybe I really hurt a person's feelings or made a person unsafe because I was feeling justified in doing so as this person who really, really wanted to be loved in this way and who really, really wanted this specific person to love me. I had to do a lot of work to just try to unpack that in order to get to this point today where I can talk about it. And it's a continuous journey. And the moment that I stop holding myself accountable to that, the moment that I say, you know what, I don't need to like think about this anymore because I'm a good person now, is the moment that I become more dangerous than ever before. Like Nova says, I've pushed some lines and I'll be trying to metaphysically make up for that forever. And so that's what brings us into our next topic of conversation, which again, some of you alluded to beforehand. We're going to talk about voice note gate. We're going to talk about the great voice note debate of July 2026 on TikTok. So I have a couple of channels that I'll showcase here. The homie Brittany Simon did a video about this 3 weeks ago. I will show parts of her video and then also parts of a video by Kat Black on this subject. I want to play these videos to give you guys the context, since I'm sure a lot of you missed this, and also to really platform some people who I think are getting this exactly right, and also showcasing some of the people who are getting this exactly wrong. And also get at the dynamic too of like how a lot of the people who got this exactly wrong are the kinds of people that we have been trained to think are like lefty, progressive, feminist people who would keep us safe in these situations. So this situation then allows us to think, well, maybe they're not particularly safe. Maybe, it's not even a matter of their personal character or them having done anything wrong, but maybe there are just things that they haven't unpacked because it feels like there's context clearly that they're not getting.
So in the past, I was a peer educator for sex education, kink, and BDSM, and like unique relationship styles, including polyamory. And I always love sharing my knowledge about informed consent. I'm going to do that again here today. But before we do, let's listen to this voicemail that was going viral. And you can decide what you think. I'll decide what I think, and we'll share. This says, my friend sent me this voice memo from a guy she went on a date with. Okay, check this out. Tell me what you think.
Time night. Definitely think you are lovely. However, I would love to, if we're going to go to your place on Thursday, I mean, I am looking to have that physical intimacy to see if, like, I am sexually compatible with you. So, like, if I'm going to come over, like, I would be hoping to, like, hook up, have sex, have a good time, have, like, that romantic spark and that physical spark there for my own sake, because it's hard for me to continue dating someone and seeing them if I don't know if I'm sexually compatible. So I know you said I don't know about that. So, like,
I'm going to pause right there just to note him saying the phrase, I know you said I don't know about that. This is an important part of the context for this conversation. Some people took this as him responding to her being on the fence and being like, okay, well, you're on the fence about this. I just want to make my position clear. But others, including myself, think that this is kind of clearly an example of him pushing a boundary, or at least pushing a bit inappropriately in a direction where it's clear that the other person is not very comfortable. Also notice that, yeah, this conversation is being framed as him talking about this from the perspective of like, these are my boundaries. This is what I want. These are my desires. You know, for my sake, this is what I need. But the way in which he's talking about it, especially if we pick up on that context, tells us that this is not exactly so much stating about your wants and desires as it is kind of pushing to the other person that maybe they should meet those wants and desires. We'll get into this because it could go on forever and ever, but I'll just keep playing Brittany's response.
I guess my thing is like, what would be the point of me coming over then if we're not gonna like hook up and like cuddle and like be intimate with each other?
Again, like, what would be the point of me coming over? Again, this was another subject of debate when it came to this conversation. She invited him over. You know, some people were like, she's saying she doesn't know about having sex, but then she wants to invite him over for the second date. There were people online, leftist women content creators online, who were like, well, everybody knows that if you invite somebody over to your house, you should expect that they'll want to fuck. That you should expect that sex should happen. You know, just very like rape culture rhetoric, right? And yet, this very phraseology gives away the game, right? Him using the phrase, what would be the point, is clearly antagonistic, right? It's clearly me saying, look, if you were to say, I don't want to have sex, and you have me over at your house for a second date, that would be pointless. That would be you engaging in a dumb thing, a pointless thing. I think the music in the background is supposed to be ironic, Razor Ruler. Like Brittany said, like it can be quite distracting, but...
And if that's what you don't want, that's fine. But like, I think we should just like end it here then, respectfully, just because first date, that's fine. Like, you want to get to know each other. I'm all about that. But like, I am looking to have that physical aspect there. And I don't want to continue seeing someone if I don't know if that's good, if that's not there or not. So up to you. Let me know. I'm happy to, if you do want me to come over, I'm happy to do so. Would love to fuck, have a good time. And, you know, we can have some wine, hang out and chill. But if you're not trying to hook up, then like, I think we should just go our separate ways. Let me know.
Brittany's gonna go off, but like, above all else, people are construing this as like very clear, healthy communication, but it's not. It's rude, right? I think it's coercive. I think it's pretty clearly coercive. And part of that coercion is also just kind of being a bit forceful and saying something, which a lot of people will be like, well, you guys just want them to talk around it and be manipulative. But it's like, no, I want people to not say things like, if we don't have sex when I come over, what would be the point? To a person that they've acknowledged is like, I don't know about that. Seems like I'm, unreasonable for that reason,
Okay. So obviously I love your reactions because like, ew. Second of all, absolutely shocked how many liberal women, but not shocked, thought this was good. So this is a leftist woman, an anti-capitalist woman. We've covered her before. I believe she's a she, they. Actually, let me just double check her pronouns. I don't see pronouns here. So probably they are getting the most flack for their defense of this guy. So let's use their conversations to have a larger one. And then I'm going to explain to you why this is not informed consent, even though it sounds like consent.
A video went viral last week of a girl that got a voice note from a guy that she was dating, and he was basically saying, hey, if we're going to continue hanging out, I just want you to know that I am seeking a sexual connection, and if you don't want to explore a sexual connection, then we should probably just end this now, because a sexual connection is a priority to me. And this was presented as a negative thing, and the comments were littered with people saying, men aren't lonely enough, etc., etc. And I was sitting there thinking, this is what consent looks like, y'all. Like, we discussed the concept of consent so much, but I don't think people actually understand what it looks like, and that voice note is what consent looks like. It is blunt, it is raw, it is obvious. And that guy gave the girl a chance to be like, oh, okay, this is moving too quickly for me, and that's not how I want to conduct us dating right now. It should be that fucking easy. Consent, especially sexual consent, should be blunt. This is a great opportunity for y'all to increase your sexual education a little bit. I am 37 years old. I have done a lot of dating and a lot of sleeping around, and I have faced a lot of sexual abuse and trauma because these conversations were not held beforehand. I think it's admirable. I think it's admirable. And I think that if you are unwilling to have upfront and blunt conversations about your sexual health and your sexual expectations with someone that you are likely eventually going to have sex with, then you probably shouldn't be dating anyone at all. Y'all need to learn how to communicate. You need to understand that the more directly and bluntly you communicate with other people, the better your fucking relationships will be. We are so unfortunately deeply conditioned by like Disney romance rape culture that we have come to believe that like romance is supposed to be like all of this silence and feelings that people are supposed to like be able to perceive. No, that's why rape culture exists, because people don't talk about shit.
Okay, respectfully to this creator, I have not seen a reductive argumentation like this in a very long time that hasn't come straight from a man's mouth. So with peace and love. So what this person is engaging in is liberal consent. So there's conservative consent, which is like no consent. This is the Graham Plattner situation. He was drunk. She had a text message. She didn't lock her door. Da, da, da. Liberal consent is close enough. It's close enough consent. I did enough. So it should be good enough, okay? Oh, I told her on a message on a voicemail I wanted to fuck, and that should be good consent, okay? Oh, she came back to my place. She invited me over, close enough. My version of consent is informed consent. So the kind of consent that I promote, I think is the best and the healthiest, is the kind that I engage with my now married partner. In contrast to this story, right? It's the first date. He's on the first date with her. He goes to get to a second date. I know you want me to come over Thursday, but like, if we're not going to fuck, I think we should stop talking because I don't know if I like you until we fuck. And it's like, okay. So, and he said, I know you already are like not into it, but like, let me know. Okay. So it's not consent. It's not an informed consensual conversation because informed consent requires a conversation. So when my partner and he was in Europe and I was in the United States and we were going to meet each other for the first time to see if we wanted to continue courting and doing serious dating. We both obviously had not had sex with each other. And I said, since you're coming to America, would you like to do like the preparation for the possibility of sex? And he said, yeah, let's do that. And I said, okay, what is our preparation? We both agreed it's sex, STI testing, birth control, protective measures. And obviously we negotiated and talked about if my partner flies all the way from Europe to meet me for the first time, to meet my family for the first time, and we don't vibe, it's also okay to not have sex. So sex was on the table as possibility, not on the table as a guarantee. Now, some people would say, I can't believe I just drove an hour to your house and I'm not even having sex with you. My partner got on a 22-hour flight to meet me for the first time to see if we even liked each other in person. And we knew that there was a possibility we wouldn't have sex.
Yeah, I really recommend watching Brittany Simon's video in full, where it just gets worse and worse in terms of the responses from that content creator and others. A few things. There was at one point a content creator who I have shared on this channel before, who I have seen as like, wow, really sharp in her analysis. Leftist, I'll just say woman of color, whose analysis of this was essentially like that people are wanting frictionless experiences in dating and just don't want to be able to deal with the blunt reality of communication. They want everything to be sort of assumed. They want everything to be sort of like soft. They want to be coddled, essentially. At one point, she used the phrase, what is a relationship if not a series of ultimatums? This is just the kind of thing that I was kind of blown away by because, for one, an ultimatum and a conversation are two very different things. Me stating what my interests, what my desires are, and me saying, if I don't get what I want, I'm out, and also what would be the point, are two very different things. There's very clear things that he said in this message that contradict the idea that he was just communicating his desires and boundaries bluntly. Because the idea, for one, of like, oh, I have to have sex with you in order to know if we can connect, that does not ring as very honest, right? That doesn't ring as something that like would make sense, because if you connect with somebody, you connect with them. If somebody's not willing to connect with you in that way, if you recognize that the other person is not on the same page with you about something that you really, really want, there's not a need to try to get an ultimatum out of a person if they already don't seem to be on the same page with what you want. Second of all, like, an ultimatum is very different, and Brittany Simon has a really good passage on this. An ultimatum is very different from a conversation. An ultimatum is, I'm not budging on this. I'm getting what I want, or else I'm severing the relationship. That's not the same thing as having boundaries. Having a boundary is like, you don't get to do something to me without, like, I'm not interested in you doing something to me. I'm not interested in this line being crossed for me. But a person not wanting to have sex with you is not them doing something to you. It's not them crossing a line. I mean, this is exactly like the subtlest version of male entitlement, right? And sexual entitlement in general. The idea that, like, if I want sex and you don't, that you're crossing the line because I said I wanted it and you don't, versus like, oh, we have different interests. So that's where a boundary would be. I can only go so far here before you cross the line. And again, like, yeah, this is settler colonial culture, as Ohala says, right? Another thing about this is that there's an expectation of a guarantee, essentially, of at least an attempt to have sex. But if the person says, like, oh, yeah, I'd be interested potentially in having sex too. So she says that, and then she invites him over, they have the second date. And then she decides in that moment, I really don't want to. What happens then to his ultimatum? He gets to then say, well, you said you would before. He gets to then say, well, maybe you've recorded a voice memo in response or a message in response saying that you are interested in it and that you respect my boundary, but now you're violating my boundary. You're manipulating me. And or he gets to throw this pity party about it. And now you're in a situation where you're not feeling safe. You know why? Because instead of somebody just respecting what you do or don't want to do, you are like, how do I avoid this person's despair or this person's wrath? And that puts you in a position to be like, well, let me just do it because I don't want to upset this person. And if you're in a position where somebody's giving you sex because they don't want to upset you, trust and believe that like any reasonable person would be unhappy in that situation, to say the least. And if you wouldn't be unhappy in a situation where a person is not really wanting to do it with you, but they're doing it because they don't want to upset you, and you think that's good because they're not crossing a boundary then, they're respecting my boundaries, you're an abuser. So this is why it's coercive. I think a lot of people emphasize this idea of like coercion has to be like, oh, I'll hurt you or I'll do something to you. I'll fire you from this job if you don't do this for me. But coercion can be emotional. And what's interesting is that people are so, they want to be so resilient against this idea that they have emotions. They hate the idea that somebody's feelings getting hurt matters. People project that a lot. Being online, it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, everybody's so whiny. Everybody's complaining so much. Everybody's so emotional. People aren't setting boundaries. People are just like demanding things of others for their own experience because they're too whiny. They're too emotional. They're too sensitive. Once you're in that line of arguing, you're a boomer. So I'm going to show you some of Cat Black's video. In this part of the video, Cat Black kind of responds to another response to this voice memo. And you're going to really see exactly what's disturbing too, or some other implicit things at the heart of this kind of animosity towards people who are pointing out that this is coercive.
Knew that she didn't want to have sex with him, knew that she was iffy about it, and then decided to say, hey, there's no point in me showing up to a second date if we're not going to fuck. Right? And he said it all in the very end. He says, well, I would love to come over. I would love to fuck. I would love to have a good time. She already made it clear that's not what she wants. And some of these guys, it's like, they are so excited about getting a woman to relinquish her control. They really want to find a woman who doesn't want it and pressure her into it so they can have the experience of making someone relent. And it's just so nefarious.
When it comes to the voice memo thing that we've been discussing for the past week on TikTok, there's one creator who I've found myself agreeing with most. I've reposted some of their videos if you want to go see what I'm talking about. When I've been formulating my own thoughts and opinions on it, I think what it really breaks down to for me is that so many people in Gen Z are uncomfortable with the topic of sex in general. But the idea of somebody directly saying, hey, we've been dating, I want to have a sexual relationship, is that something that you want to? Feels
been dating, but it was literally the night after a first date.
like an attack because it is making them vulnerable and it is making them uncomfortable. And so they are interpreting that as inappropriate, embarrassing, like a bad thing for this other person to do. Because God forbid you ask me about what I want sexually while we are currently seeing each other in the romantic way, which the next natural step would obviously be to talk about sex. I do think that you can disagree with the way that he chose to do it. If you find it weird that he did it in a voice memo, I think that's perfectly fine. But other people have brought up, specifically the creator I mentioned earlier, where it was like, okay, well, actually, maybe he was trying to respect this person's boundaries by not doing it in person and giving them the way to opt out of talking about sex in person by just laying it all out on the table, directly communicating, saying, hey, this is what I want going forward. Is that something you want too? If not, maybe we can just call a spade and move on. Because then you could argue that he was explicitly giving his consent and then explicitly asking for hers. You can disagree with the mode of communication, but in what universe is that not what that is? Some people were like, well, he crossed a boundary. Well, how is he supposed to know if he crossed a boundary if she didn't set that? And this is something that they are still learning and figuring out together early on.
If she says, I don't know about it, that is not an invitation for you to be like, well, I really want it. And if we don't do it, what's the point? So either do it or I'm cutting off the relationship. That's not a pro-social reaction to somebody saying, I don't know about doing sexual stuff, right? Like,
the dating phase. Oh, this is an inherent boundary. No, not necessarily. The reason it's also not an inherent boundary is because it is so ingrained in our society to send voice memos to each other. Maybe it was his way of trying to have them both approach it from a comfortable angle, aka not in person, aka cutting a clean break if it's not something she was interested in too. Some people were like, well, maybe he should have done it in person. If you are so uncomfortable with someone bringing up sex in a voice memo, what makes you think that you're going to be comfortable if they're going to bring it up in person too?
Now the idea is that the problem is that he brought up sex in a voice memo. You see how like unwilling they are to talk about this situation on its own terms? You see how much like context that they exclude or things that they are obfuscating in order to discuss this? Like they're dating, they brought up sex in a voice memo, they're trying to have communication. You know, the previous content creator that Brittany Simon was reacting to, the title of their video was essentially, do y'all want consent or not? Do you understand how like demented of a thing that is to say? Want consent? Do y'all want consent or not? So I'm supposed to basically say, take this or I'm not deserving of consensual sex. Like take this or rape. One or the other. That's what you are basically positing towards people for simply pointing out anything beyond like this person is Jeffrey Epstein is bad. It's the same way Alex Myers with the bear in the Obsession movie was like, oh, he wasn't that bad. He wasn't that bad. He wasn't that bad. Up until he did that one bad thing. But before that, he wasn't that bad. He wasn't the creepy predator guy. It's the same way that these folks are defending Voice Memo Guy because he's not Jeffrey Epstein. Like, just baffling, right? And there's more to say here about the prudishness because there's a line that this person is about to drop that you will possibly be baffled by.
Overall, this entire conversation is just continuing to perpetuate the idea that consent has to look one very specific way. A lot of you don't actually know the nuances of consent and how you can give consent and take it away, and there's continued consent, and consent can be revoked at any time. A lot of you don't know how to feel comfortable talking about sex, and it fucking shows. Sex should not be such an uncomfortable topic. You should be advocating for us to talk about sex in a more direct way, because if you continue to act like sex is not something you should be talking about in a fucking voice memo to the person that you're dating, then whoa, we have a long way to fucking go. Last but not least, the final thing that I will say on this, I'm repeating something I said in multiple videos. I urge you to not talk about sex and engage in public conversations about sex, specifically on a place like TikTok, if you yourself have not engaged in that type of intimacy yet. Your voice holds very little value in a topic about sex if it is not something you have actual experience in.
So this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that there's a lot of people online that you are going to realize just because they're leftist doesn't mean that they're leftist. Just because they're progressive doesn't mean they're progressive. This person just mobilized progressive language to basically say, if you don't have sex, you're not allowed to engage in a conversation about sex. Essentially, just pruding, like just calling people prudes, shaming people, children, right? What about children? You don't think it would be important for 15, 16, 17-year-olds to be online and having conversations about sex? You know, trying to learn about consent, trying to have conversations about sex, and trying to have conversations about consent. You don't think that would be, but like, again, like, this is right. This is like, shout out to Ahmed Matar Gaza. I'm going to put his fundraiser in the pinned comment in a bit. The idea that these folks are finding ways to say boomer conservative things that our parents drilled into us, but in TikToky language, it's baffling. It's genuinely baffling. You know, I wrote down, for instance, like that one can have beliefs and then actively contradict them while claiming to apply them because they're hyper rationalizing what feels comfortable to them. It's like a lot of folks have beliefs, but what they don't have is like an actual ability to live on those beliefs. They haven't internalized that praxis. They haven't actually processed it in the body, in the brain. They just think it's true. Like the way that a lot of misogynistic men will be like, well, I am a feminist. I believe men and women should have equal rights. But they don't operate in ways that suggest that that's actually true, that suggests that they actually feel that way or that they actually see the world that way. So you think something is true, but you don't see the world according to whether or not it's true. You think that there is a lot of racism against Black people, but you don't see the world keeping that in mind. You think that men and women should be equal and that women are oppressed in certain ways, but you don't see the world in a way that suggests that you're thinking about that you're keeping that in mind. So again, there is just this reticence for people to move past the intellectual because it's a way to circumvent reflection. A man can say nice things about women, can say that he loves women, and can say that he believes men and women are equal and that women should not be treated poorly. And he can say that without ever having to reflect on whether he's treated a woman poorly. He can say that without ever having to reflect on whether or not he has co-signed or condoned behavior that is violent towards women. It's like Aries Society says, like applying concept to their lives. They think it's intellectual and verbal only. So like this conversation was heavily tilted by people like this. People who have built platforms online because they're good at talking and they're good at understanding the concepts. They just don't have to actually process them. And then they build audiences and then they speak to those audiences about things like the voice memo situation. And they don't have to have real training and consent and like consent communication. They don't really have to have like the life experience in which to apply these ideas. They don't have to have like the ability to do that. All that they have to do is say like, I believe these things. And for many cases, you will like their content because it won't reveal itself. It's very easy to say, for instance, that Jeffrey Epstein is a bad person. It's very easy to say that people in high places, with a lot of power are predators. It's easy to say that. It doesn't imply anything about you.
I know that people get mad at me when I say that. You can be educated about sex, but when it comes to the social politics of what it's like to engage in sex with another person, you probably shouldn't be tossing your hat in the ring. Because a lot of the people who are trying to engage in this conversation are young. And I know that we've talked about how Gen Z is considered the most sexless generation. I'm not going to get into that. But if that is the case, and Gen Z is who's overwhelmingly in their 20s right now, which is usually the decade that you're dating people the most, then all of this does go hand in hand. And we have a long way to go if we're taking so many steps back that we shouldn't even be talking about sex when we're dating. A lot of you need to remember that sex is something you participate in. It is not something that is done to you. Once you get that through your brain and you rewrite the idea of what sex actually is, it will change a lot of your perspective.
Okay, I gotta be honest, that video kind of grated on my nerves. I keep thinking about him saying, I know you said you're not so sure about that. It's clear the issue that inspired the voicemail was the fact that she did clearly communicate that she wasn't interested in having sex with him. A lot of what you guys are saying about this makes sense if that's not the conversation that was had. My problem is men are dishonest when it comes to how they pursue this. So many men will pretend that they want a relationship when they just want to get laid. They will use the right words, say the right things to get you to a point where you are available to them sexually and they get what they want. It is very frustrating that a lot of people don't understand that, yes, it's true. Gen Z has issues with sex. Okay. Gen Z has a clear understanding of when stuff like this is not okay. And older folks, we accepted a lot of stuff that we shouldn't have. Like for some people, they may think, well, if he wants to come over to your place, obviously he wants to have sex with you. I think you could say that he did it respectfully, but I don't think it was respectful for him to know that she was not sure about that and then give her an ultimatum. He gave her an ultimatum about how she needed to agree to have sex with him after the very, very first date if he's going to have a second date.
So I have a lot to say about this. I think Cat Black really killed it, particularly by just like fessing up to the reality that like there is an age thing here. There is a generational thing here. So I want to get into that in a second. But first, I just want to post quickly Ahmed's link. So Ahmed is with us in the chat right now. I have shared his campaigns a few times before. He is in Gaza. He's raising money for his family. His mother is in need of medical help. He has been locked out of essentially getting his visa in Canada despite having applied for a long time. He's not being offered refugee status there. And so I just want to take this moment to bring attention towards his campaign. And the link has just been posted in the chat. This is Ahmed. He has a couple of videos on his channel as well. He's a content creator. So if anybody can donate whatever they can to him, please do. That being said, okay, so the generational thing, this is the biggest thing that I think has been sticking in my craw for a long time. Maybe it's because of the things I talked about at the beginning. That incident that happened to me online happened with somebody who was a couple years older than me. Maybe it's because I've been in a lot of spaces where it's been people that are older than me that have been like progressive on one hand, talking about sex positivity, queerness, but then also sexually harassing me or other people. But I just feel like, when are we going to have a conversation about how bad millennials are about the sex politic? Like how normalized this sort of 2010s, late 2000s era of sex positivity, how much damage it is now doing when trying to be applied in the 2026 context. Because I will readily tell you that there was a huge improvement, like from that transition from Gen X to millennial. There was a lot that got better because millennials were, and I don't want to just say millennials because I don't want you to just distill this down to, generational discourse on TikTok, but the past 15, 20 years, there was a lot of progress, right? In terms of having conversations about consent, having conversations about assault, in terms of, obviously representation and like securing material gains, securing legal protections for queer folks. Obviously, also a lot of that has been very heavily compromised under the Trump regime. But this is the reality. I have a great appreciation for the way that was paved by my older peers, but I also witnessed them being inappropriately horny, inappropriately sexual online and offline multiple times. And I watched people get hurt by it. And I watched younger people learn terrible habits because of it. I learned bad habits because of it in part. And I watched also as some of them sort of delved into like using their marginalized identity as a shield from being able to hold themselves accountable to participating in rape culture. That's all to say that when people are saying things like Gen Z is not having enough sex, when things like, the content creator I was talking about earlier says things like the kids are Puritans, Gen Z are puritanical, Puritans. Right now, it's not very clear because folks like me and other folks who agree with me are not making their voices heard very much. We're feeling a little bit intimidated in the space. But within a couple of years, it's going to be very clear that this is a reactionary idea. It's going to be very clear that this is actually a right-wing reactionary sentiment that has been normalized among even very left-wing radical folks in their 30s, that it's okay to basically call the younger generation prudish under a new name, to use sophisticated language and social justice language, whether it be about, communication, whether it be about boundaries, or whether it be about the panopticon or Puritanism, conservatism, using these lines of argumentation just to say the same thing that older generations have said, which is like that there's something wrong with the kids and how they're having sex.
Am I so out of touch? No. It's the children who are wrong.
We're living in a time period right now where besides the Epstein shit and the Drake shit and the Diddy shit and all of that, and besides the fact that we're in the wake of like the damage done by the manosphere and Gamergate, the ways in which that this has affected young boys and girls and young people, even in elementary school, let alone junior high, high school, college, etc. All of these things, like in public conversations about sexual trauma, the the vicious attacking of women in a public setting who are victims of abuse, conversations about patriarchy and manipulation, conversations about age gaps. It's as if millennials just want to turn their brain off when it comes to this subject for their younger peers. They want to just pretend that their younger peers are just being irrational for, in some instances, repudiating people for how they talk about sex. It's a lot easier to do that than to think to themselves, well, maybe I have been kind of creepy sometimes. As Moonchild Mari says, it is very normal to want to protect yourself in a society that is not ensuring your safety. And it's almost as if there's an entitlement to young bodies, an entitlement to young people who should be out here fucking and should be out here fucking me, the older person who's hot. I wonder if it's that or if it's something else. But regardless, there is a reticence to actually hear yourself. Do y'all want consent or not? Do you hear yourself? Gen Z just wants a frictionless dating life. The kids are puritanical. These are all just new gen lefty versions of toughen up. These kids want everything handed to them. They don't let you say anything these days. The same tactics that we're used to right-wing and chuddy men making about racism, for instance. Oh, they don't want you to say anything these days. They don't even want you to have a conversation about race. They're trying to censor us from having these difficult conversations. Remember that conservatives used to do that? They're trying to censor us from talking about the real stuff. Now, millennial leftists are saying that towards Gen Z about a voice memo saying, oh, these kids, they just don't want to even have a conversation about sex. So I invite you to think about how backwards that is. What is it that causes a person to see somebody making a social critique of somebody else's behavior being representative of rape cultures, gender discrimination, etc.? What makes a person see that and go, this person is just trying to be babied. This person just wants to be babied. They just want to be coddled. I invite you to think about that. And yeah, it's very connected, Kid Cozy Meg, with the ACE video that I made. Sharonda J. Brown's book about refusing compulsory sexuality. There is this insistence that for you to be sex positive, for you to be resisting modes of oppression via sex, you gotta have a certain level of putting out. You gotta put out, and then you gotta be super cool with putting out a specific way. There's just that approach, and I find that to be baffling. I find that to be really, really upsetting. Because these are supposed to be people that we look up to. I mean, I'm 29. I'm on the older side of what would be considered Gen Z for sure. I'm literally the oldest type of Gen Z. But somebody who's in their 30s, who's lived through this stuff, who has been through this stuff, like the person who was talking about how they've been through sexual trauma. This is somebody that I should be able to feel like I can confide in. These content creators who do all their reading and all their thinking, who have organized and who will talk about their leftist politics. These are supposed to be people I can learn from. My older peers who have learned a little bit more than me. But if we can't even be safe around leftist, feminist women, why should we feel safe to have a lot of sex? So I'm going to conclude with a couple of points. Beyond just this point of we need to do more than just hating Epstein. Hating Epstein is not enough. We need to apply that largely in the case of obsession or in the case of the voice memo. We need to do better than just demand, don't be a rapist. We need to do better than just say, don't be a rapist. We need to do more than just, oh, don't be a predator. That's not enough. That's not enough. Another thing is just beware of thinking that you're too smart to be wrong. That is the big, beware of thinking you're too cool to be wrong, too smart to be wrong. Beware of thinking that because you've been the smart person, because you've been the good person, because you've been the woke person, that you can't do any wrong. That there might not be a situation in which you're being criticized and you might actually have to reflect on whether or not you were misreading something. At the very least, to be like more cautious about how you conduct it. I can even understand somebody saying like, hey, from my personal point of view, I don't think he was being coercive on that voice memo, but I didn't like how he was talking about it. And I get why a lot of people were upset about it because these are sensitive times and people have been through a lot of stuff. Even just that was not enough. Like, these people had to go through the process of saying, you guys are Puritans, you guys are babies. These people had to go on and say, you guys don't know anything about sex because you're not having enough sex. You're prudes. You don't want to have conversations about sex. Full attack mode, which is always revealing. Like, don't let this internet shit fool you. The normalization of fighting and fighting and fighting online. Don't let that fool you. It's always revealing when somebody has to get defensive. It's always revealing when somebody has to get defensive. So one thing that has to be done is, frankly, Gen Z needs to talk about their sex life. We need to empower content creators, writers, artists, etc. to talk about these issues, to talk about their own relationship with sex. We need to highlight that. Millennials, people who are in their 30s and 40s, get out of the way with your old politic. Maybe it worked for you when you were our age because it helped you break down some doors. It helped you pave a way. But now you need to move. You need to move and you need to learn from the younger generation. Let the younger generation speak to their own experiences and define them. It's happening a lot. Misty Flames is speaking to it in the chat. People are dealing with these older folks, like few years older young folks that are just flatly like already trying to situate themselves as like, I am the wise elder and you have to shut up and listen to me. It's like, man, you're 35. You're not even like 80. People who are like 33, 34, 35 who are like, shut up and listen to me. Shut up and listen to my sex politic. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not having enough sex. Alrighty. Let Gen Z speak on their sex life. It feels like it should be bare minimum, but I keep going back to this piece by Dr. Devin M. Price, not to be confused with the famous other Dr. Devin Price, when having that conversation about Sabrina Carpenter. And Price noted, like, to millennials, Sabrina Carpenter's image feels almost tame compared to this hypersexualized teen, often underaged pop icons we grew up with, and how Sabrina Carpenter appears to be in relative control of her image. But Price was saying, I analyze this as a 33-year-old who came of age when Britney Spears dominated pop culture. My younger Gen Z counterparts are coming of age during a very different cultural moment. Again, like Price says, many millennials misinterpret Gen Z's reaction to Carpenter's album cover, assuming it stems from prudishness or sexual conservatism. On the surface, it seems plausible, but what millennials see as playful female empowerment, younger generations often interpret as an unwitting invitation for their male peers to treat women as objects. There's three major factors that have shaped Gen Z's experience: loss of abortion rights, pandemic-induced isolation, and the growing influence of the manosphere. And I was just blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, finally somebody actually spoke to some Gen Z folks and was like, what do they have to say about this? What are they going through? And instead, because you have your lefty platforms and your lefty words and your big words and your glasses and all of that, you get to just act like a reactionary online and get hella clout and money for it. Before I get to my next point, I want to also highlight a particular passage again from The Right to Sex. This is talked about in Amya Srinivasan's book, The Right to Sex, which I shouted out earlier, who mentions, in terms of talking about today's landscape of what young people are facing sexually, young women are facing sexually, that the invocation of young people in political discourse often serves reactionary ends. Like, for instance, calls to protect their innocence. But then on the other side of calls to protect their innocence, this is my interpretation, we're getting calls to end Gen Z's innocence, right? They're too innocent. They're acting too innocent. Grow up. Be an adult. But Srinivasan says that younger generations have a sensitivity to the workings of gendered and racialized power that outstrips anything seen before in the political mainstream. She also gets into talking about how reading a book by Peggy Orenstein, Girls and Sex, Navigating the Complicated New Landscape, there's an anecdote about a young Latina woman who sort of speaks up publicly against the dean of the school, saying that something that the dean said was extremely sexist and promoting rape culture. And compares it to Srinivasan's own experience finishing high school in 2003 and how Srinivasan did not have the words, the conceptual resources, slut-shaming, victim-blaming rape culture to say anything articulate. So this is another example of how you can actually listen to these generations, how you can actually have an open mind towards them. But if you keep staying in that mindset of like, well, I've been around the block, I know a few things, I know exactly what this is that they're doing. This is just the same thing that happened when I was their age, but they're reacting to it worse. Let me tell them what to do so they don't make mistakes, so they don't regress the culture. Yeah, kids have been horrifically abandoned, especially in the COVID era. Children are oppressed, and not just children, but young people, young adults, right? Somebody who's 24. If you're so concerned about why is it that Gen Z isn't having enough sex, which again, like, I don't even know how much you can substantiate the polling we've done about that, but whatever, like, let's say we believe that polling. Why don't you go out and talk to Gen Z and ask them? Instead of imposing views like, oh, well, they're just reactionary. They've been taught to be reactionary because TikTok has melted their brains. My next point is to fight rape culture, we need to fight not just for better sex ed, legal protections, and economic justice, but for a free Palestine and for an end to world imperialism. We will struggle to fight for these things if we do not also deprogram ourselves from rape culture. This is the big one. You know, I get into a lot of arguments, or people like to argue with me. I don't really fight back too much. But people think what I do here, because of the way I look and the way that I talk and the subjects that I talk about, that what I'm doing here is basically just like some 2016 boba liberal shit or some like, oh, identity politics, Obama era shit. But like, if you watch my videos with an open mind, you will see that I'm talking about imperialism and colonialism. I'm talking about war crimes. I'm talking about capitalism. I'm talking about the necessity for organized labor, the necessity to organize labor to shut down imperialism. I'm saying a lot of the lefty things. I'm just not saying them in the way that people get points for online. So I don't get as much clout as certain other content creators, to be very frank with you. Because I'm not out here doing all this, you know? And I get it, because I look maybe in a way that's pretentious. I look maybe a way that's like performative, whatever. But genuinely, the reason I talk about things like this is because these are worlds that need to get bridged. Your inability to understand rape culture will make it very hard for you to have a good pro-Palestine politic, because you'll be in organizations allowing rape culture to happen in the organization, and then all the women are going to leave the organization, and you're going to be sitting there thinking, well, it's just because the kids are too sensitive. They don't want to make compromises. They don't want to work hard in an organization, and not the fact that one of the leaders of the organization or the chapter of the local organization is harassing women. You know, you're going to make mistakes like that, let alone like conversations about whose voices we listen to and whose voices we don't listen to. A lot of us, for instance, are still just really programmed that we really want to listen to a tough white guy talk about beating up the bad guys, talk about how evil the bad guys are, or like a really nice, smart white guy talk about how bad the enemy is with a bunch of stats. And then, you know, like there's a place for that, of course. But if you ask me, it's really important that we talk about all these ways in which these things are connected so we can see the information we're missing. I find that to be necessary to have the right politic, to have a politic that's liberating, whatever. I don't know. I don't know words. My next point is some important questions. When have we been violated and refused to admit it to save our own pride? When have we violated other people's consent and refused to interrogate that? A lot of us might be more comfortable talking about situations where we see other people violating other people, or when we've been violated by somebody. Very, very hard to talk about when you've been violated by somebody. But for some people, it's easier than talking about how they might have violated somebody. Does that make sense? Like, you can be a victim and also an abuser. As a matter of fact, we know factually that many abusers have been victims in the past. The last thing I'll say as something that you can take away from this, perhaps, is another point from the patron who inspired this video and said, I can say when it comes to developing healthy attitudes around sex, after experiencing trauma related to it, listening to podcasts and videos on the study of sexology was massively helpful. Personal therapy gave coping tools and ways to deal with emotional fallout, but it was understanding the biology and psychosocial aspects of sex that really doused some of the confusion and shame that can occur. So I highly recommend, for whatever experience you've had in this realm and whatever you want to do politically, that you study sexology, that you learn a little bit from sexologists, you learn from sex workers, from people who have been sex workers, because you don't think it's going to help. You think it's unrelated. You think it's disconnected, but it's not. So that's my talk.